Okay, welcome everyone to this love project called Still. This is a love project, a series of YouTube interviews that we'll be conducting with sharing stories of bereaved mothers or the birth parent. This love project is to honor our son Jayden's legacy. Jayden passed away about 8 years ago at full-term stillbirth. And so the stories of this project is an attempt to reduce shame, loneliness, and our effort to create connection for anybody who can reach us. And starting us off today is Zoe. Thank you, Zoe, for being our first guest. Really happy to have you here today honoring your angel, Wilder.
Thank you so much, Nav.
So Zoe, let's start off with learning about kind of where did you grow up and what was your upbringing like?
All right, so I grew up in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And I guess my upbringing was a little bit unconventional, kind of had hippie parents. My parents separated when I was 2. So I was raised with my mom until I was about 14. And, not the best upbringing, probably not the worst upbringing. I got some childhood trauma, but I mean,
Who
I always
doesn't?
say if you've experienced childhood and you live in a society, then you've probably been traumatized or need therapy.
Yeah, I was just saying who hasn't, right? Like yeah. And do you remember in your childhood ever like somebody explaining to you about death, or even as a teenager, were there ever conversations about that in your household?
Yeah, so I was always treated pretty openly and spoken to in a pretty adult way. Things were explained to me pretty clearly and honestly. And I experienced the death of a pet really young. And then when I was about 15, I experienced also the loss of a really close friend in elementary school. She just simply did not come to school again one day. And then I was told that she had passed from a brain tumor.
Oh wow.
So I was a little young to understand that. And then around 15 years old, I lost my stepdad as well.
Hmm.
So some experience with death.
Right. And the fact that you were explained kind of, I mean,
Yeah.
even though you were young, it was openly shared, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So Zoe, if share whatever you feel comfortable to share, but how would you like to honor Wilder today? Maybe perhaps talk about your personal experience with pregnancy and infant loss. Like how how did it all unravel for you?
All right. Well, I think for me, it actually kind of starts with my own relationship with my mom. We had a very tumultuous relationship and are currently estranged. I'll get to that part of the story as part of my story of loss. So I actually never wanted to have children. I was very adamantly against having children because I sort of did not want to parent someone the way I'd been parented, or I was just afraid because of how, I felt about my own
Mm-hmm.
experiences in childhood and with my mother. I was really insecure about being a mom and maybe not being able to emotionally regulate or just screwing it all up somehow. So I never wanted kids and until I was quite a bit older. So I was around like 36 when I was with my partner and started to think, oh, maybe we do want kids. And, he said that he really wanted kids and he kept saying, someday I want kids. And I asked if it was a deal breaker for him and he said yes. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I have to decide if I want to have a child. And I thought, and so I decided I did. And he was like happy with that answer, just sort of saying, well, yeah, like someday we'll have kids. And I was like, well, someday's like now because of my age.
Yeah.
So I think that was a bit shocking for him. I think men often feel like they can wait for longer. They don't have that physical toll on their bodies. So I actually got pregnant the first time with Wilder. Well, sorry, it was not actually my first pregnancy. I experienced a pregnancy when I was quite young and had an abortion. And then, so I had 3 abortions before my first full term birth.
Mm.
The first one because of my age, the second one and the third one because the father would just have been a wildly inappropriate person to have as a partner. The third partner was it was quite hard. I was in my 30s already, and my partner was abusive, and so I knew that I didn't want to bring a kid into that situation.
Yeah.
And it was actually going through that experience. Actually, he was violent towards me the day that I came home from having an abortion. There was a physical altercation. So it really reaffirmed for me that I had made the right choice to not bring a child into that person's life.
Mm-hmm.
But because of my age, I felt really, it didn't feel right. I felt quite guilty about it because I thought, like, I can't be making mistakes like this at this age when I actually could viably really be a mom at this point.
Right.
But I know I made the right decision, but that one came with some pain and guilt, and got out of that relationship as a result of those feelings, which is, you know, a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
And then with my current partner, we were trying for a while there. We got pregnant fairly quick within about 6 months of trying, and I conceived him when I was 38 years old. Was super happy, you know, changed my whole life and did so much work on myself just to ensure being a good mom, you know, used all natural body products, ate the best food, was really, really careful about everything, just felt that real feeling of like treasuring that sacred life inside of me and wanting to just be a good mom right from the moment of conception.
Right.
And my pregnancy was difficult. I had hyperemesis quite bad for like the first 5 or 6 months of my pregnancy, and I was in the hospital several times a week for fluid and vitamin IV. So it was pretty gross, pretty hard on my body.
That's very hard.
Yeah, and I really didn't. I loved carrying him and feeling him kick and just knowing that he was with me. But at the time I didn't love pregnancy, and that was actually a really big instigator for feelings of guilt after losing him, because I felt like, fuck, I wish I had loved every minute of it and treasured every moment of it. And so I felt quite guilty for, you know, how hard it had been for me.
Of course.
And so perfectly healthy full-term baby, we had decided we wanted to try a home birth because I only lived literally like a 3 or 4 minute drive from our hospital. So I thought it should be okay. And was in labor at my house to try and do a water birth, and was like, I don't know, 12 to 15, I can't quite remember, hours into labor. Was things were going well. I went to the hospital at one point to get a little bit of pain relief. And they sent me home because everything was fine. Got back home. And so at one point, everyone was sort of trying to nap. We were trying to lie down and take a little rest, myself, my partner, my midwife, and my doula. And at one point during laying down, I felt like a tug inside of my womb that really upset me. And I didn't know, I felt very strange about waking everybody up and freaking out because it was such a painful experience and I did not know what was normal or what to expect. In retrospect, I wish that I had immediately made everybody get in the car and go to the hospital, because that's the one thing that sticks in my mind now, that like I felt something and I was most likely right, that something had gone wrong at that point. So I kind of, once people were waking up, I kind of said, you know, I'm not feeling so great. I felt this tug, and they take my temperature, and I've been vomiting a lot through the labor, and was getting, and so a fever is common apparently if you've been really dehydrated and vomiting a lot. So we decided to just go to the hospital to be conservative at that point. Got in the car, went to the hospital. We got there, everything was still fine. I was hooked up to all the monitoring equipment and everything seemed to be going well. And then that's when everything just really went off the rails. And it went very quickly. It was like suddenly the heart rate monitor was just beeping uncontrollably. And within seconds of hearing all this beep, 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 the room was literally just full of people. Like it felt like there was 100 people around me, and things got really chaotic. And there was like a lot of yelling and chaos. And they were saying like, we're going to try to, you got to try to deliver the baby. So somebody pulled my legs up over my head and just said, push, push. And so there was, and the door was open and there was all these people there. And I tried to push and it didn't work. And at that point, they said, we have to get you to the operating room. So it was really scary. And so they wheeled me down to the OR. And the last thing I remember was saying, like, do I get the choice to stay awake for my C-section? And I just remember a nurse saying, there's no time for that, as she put the sedation over my face.
Oh, wow.
So the next thing was I woke up totally out of it from the sedation. They wheeled me over to another table, and just the energy in the room was just so bad. And they said, say hello to your baby. And he was sort of just laying there on a metal table with his eyes closed. And they asked me what his name was. And I said, Wilder is his name. And he was so beautiful. And he was just unresponsive. I later learned that my midwife had resuscitated him and that it had taken quite a long time. That when they opened me up, there was no blood in the cord. So something had gone on with oxygen and blood supply to the baby. And then they told me that they would need to, he wasn't okay, and that he was going to be heli lifted out of our community hospital to a specialized children's hospital, which is a ferry ride away. So Wilder and my husband were heli lifted out, and they told me that I would have to wait to have x-rays to make sure that nothing got left behind inside of me. It actually ended up with the x-rays and the ferry ride, it ended up being about 8 hours before I could join my husband and my baby at the hospital. Yeah. So that was a really just horrible and difficult time. Like, I just wanted my baby. I just wanted to know if he was okay. I remember being put up in the hospital room at one point, and my midwife was a close friend of mine, as was my doula. And I remember them just being around my bed. And I remember just grabbing my midwife's hand and asking, like, he's going to be okay, right? And she just looked at me, and it was the most haunting voice. And she just said, I don't know. And that was when I was really coming around from the sedation, and my heart just absolutely sank. Like, I expected her to say, like, yeah, we're having XYZ, some problem, and they can usually deal with it. And she just looked fucking devastated. She said, I don't know. So that was sort of when the real panic started to kick in. And then we got into the ambulance, and I had asked my dad to come with us. So he was following in his vehicle, and we got to the hospital, and they were trying to triage me and everything. And I was like, look, like, somebody follow me to my baby's room and do all of this. And they were taking a long time. And then they said they wanted me to like rest and receive some more pain support in my own room in another wing. And so I got up out of the wheelchair, like literally hours after having a C-section, where I actually almost died from blood loss during the C-section because it was done so quickly. And I said no, and I just got up out of the wheelchair and started walking. I was like, I'll go find him. Like, you guys can do whatever you need to do, but like, if you keep me from him like a moment longer, I will. I don't know what I'll do, but I was gonna do something, you know. So they took me to him. I had received at that point a photo from my husband from in the helicopter, and from when he had gotten to the hospital. And it was my baby in this vest with tubes coming out of him everywhere and a little mask over his eyes and hooked up to all these machines. And I just was like, he's not okay. Like, I really knew in that moment, like, something is seriously, seriously wrong. And it was just, like, I don't know how to describe it. It was like the whole world just fell away from me. And I was just praying. I'm not, a faith-based person, even though I'm spiritual. And I was praying to every God and deity I could possibly think of, just in case. Like, please, please. So we got up to the room with him, and what ensued was basically the next 4 days of, thinking maybe there was some hope in that first day. Maybe there was some hope for him that we would see brain activity and that he would be okay. And then over the 4 days we were there, it became apparent that there was no brain activity. And in retrospect, I realize now that those 4 days were used they have to have you in that coma for like 72 hours, I think, to pronounce brain death. And they were letting us down easy by giving us that time to be with him instead of just saying, your baby's not going to make it on the first day. Right. So in a way, I'm so glad I got to have that time with him. But in a way, it almost felt like having that hope and then realizing there was no hope was really difficult to let go of. Yeah. During the 4 days, I had my parents and step parents there, my partner's parents there, my midwife and my doula, and we, sat with him. We held him when we were able to, because he was very hooked up to equipment. we sang him every song we could think of. Any song like Wild Thing, You Make My Heart Sing, because his name was Wilder, all the Rappy songs, and we just held vigil around his bed. And
take your time. It's okay. Take a breath.
so at one point, I was holding his hand and I was sitting with him, and I just knew he wasn't going to be okay. And I could feel him really strongly, his presence really strongly, even through his hand. Like, I wouldn't say he was really squeezing my hand, but I just felt him in there, like he was holding me back. And at one point, I think it was on the second day, maybe the third, and told him, I just knew he was hanging in there for me. And so I told him, that I forgive you if you need to leave, and I would never want to trap you in a broken body. And at that point, I didn't feel his presence with me strongly anymore from that point on. And my midwife and a nurse were at the computer monitors just a little ways away, and she came in and said, honey, what just happened? And I told her what I had just said to him. And the nurse and midwife, they surrounded me and they said, this is the only moment in which we've seen any brain activity in your baby. There was a spike on the monitors where he had responded to me.
Oh my God.
So that was comforting, but heartbreaking. So I knew that he had heard me and he got my message. And then there was nothing else after that.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Ooh.
So that was probably the main moment of connection I got to have with him, aside from having him inside me. And then when it became apparent that he wasn't going to make it, they had a photographer come in and do a photo shoot with us on the morning that we were going to let him go. And it felt weird, like a photo shoot, a professional photo shoot with your baby who's going to die, but they told us that often parents really want to have it afterwards, so we made the choice to go ahead with it, and I'm really glad we did. I treasure those pictures now. And then I think it was around 10 something in the morning, maybe a little later, my memory is not very good, they asked how we wanted to proceed, and I said we wanted it to be outside so that he could be under the sun out in the trees, and I wanted our dog to come and meet him, who'd been getting to go for walks but sleeping in the car in the parking lot, and having people come and walk him. And actually my mother-in-law was sleeping in her van out there with him at night.
Oh wow.
She wouldn't have to leave the hospital. And so they wrapped him up and took his little machine outside with him, and we all gathered around and we sang All You Need Is Love by the Beatles to him. And then they just took him and took his little tube out of his mouth and finally gave him to me with no tubes, and I put him inside my shirt, and that was the first time I got to have my baby against my body. And it was the only time I got to have him against my body. And he didn't take any more breaths. He stopped breathing immediately without assistance and was gone very quickly. And I remember just holding him, and somebody tried to step towards me. I was screaming, crying. And someone, I think it was my mother, tried to step towards me. I remember just putting my hand out and saying, like, stay back, like, everyone stay away from me. Just leave me and my baby alone. And they put me back in the wheelchair with him in my shirt. And I remember closing my eyes so I wouldn't have to see anybody as we went through all the elevators and hallways. I just held him with my eyes closed and tried to make a little cocoon for us. And I laid with him for quite a long time in the room, and I regret not laying there longer. I felt like I was holding up something. I felt like nobody was pressuring me, but I still felt pressured to move through the process in some way. And then some people took turns, some family members, took turns holding him. We swaddled him. And then everybody left, and we had to catch a ferry home. And I remember someone saying, if we leave right now, we can catch the 7 o'clock ferry.
No.
So I just left him in the hospital room and we walked out. And honestly, I regret it so much. I wish I'd stayed longer. I wish I had held him all night.
Mhm.
There's nothing more unnatural, I think, than putting your baby's body on this little tray in the hospital room and then just leaving without them.
Mhm. Yeah.
In retrospect, I sort of wish that I had like screamed and cried and they had to like pry him out of my arms. Like that would have been more appropriate to how I was feeling
Yeah.
than what I did, which was to just calmly leave.
Mhm. Yeah. The feelings at that stage, like you said, it's, looking back at it, you want to hold your baby and nothing else. And
Yeah.
at that time, the feelings are so heightened, it's even hard to think, let alone breathe and do anything else, like make a
Yeah.
proper decision. So I hear you. So
Yeah.
had you already set up a room for Wilder? Like when you got home, did you have to
I
space his room, or like what was the setup?
I had a crib for him, but we had kind of planned to just have him in a bassinet in our room. So we had a bassinet by the bed and like a crib just kind of full of diapers and baby supplies and a changing table in the other room.
Yeah. So what was that like? Talk to me about as much and as little as you need to share, right? Like what was that like to go home without Walter?
I asked some friends to go to my house and take everything out because we had left in the middle of a home birth. So there was like a water pool. And um, so when I got home, my house was cleaner than I've ever seen it with a fire in the fireplace and bouquets of flowers everywhere. And like all the baby stuff was gone. I
Mm,
kind of meant like clean up the birth mess, but like all the baby stuff was gone, which is fine. My friends did their very best that they could in a difficult situation without, really clearly knowing. And there was a big basket of food and alcohol and snacks and bouquets of flowers. So I remember being struck by coming home by feeling like how loved we were and how taken care of we were. And so there was this sense of like gratitude and beauty in just this heartbreaking situation.
mhm,
And I was just very much in shock.
mhm,
Um, I kind of want to jump back a little bit to an experience in the hospital that has really stuck with me, which was I woke up from my C-section so highly medicated on morphine and fentanyl. And um, I continued to just be given medication in the hospital. Um, and nobody asked me if I wanted to be medicated or explained to me the potential of being sober and connecting with my baby in a different way and my feelings in a different way. And I have so much anger and guilt and regret over the fact that I feel like that experience was stolen from me and that I wasn't really clearly given the option to not take the medication. Although I know if I hadn't want to, nobody could force me. But again, I felt like a baby myself in that situation, being taken care of and just given stuff and I wasn't in a position to understand that choice on my own. And so I really regret that that choice was not made more clear to me and given to me or even
yeah.
posed as a choice. Because one of my biggest regrets to this day is that I was really high
Mm,
and I missed getting to be as devastated as I was and getting to be
mhm,
clear with him. So that has continued to be a pretty traumatic part of the experience that really haunts me
mm,
and something that I would like to advocate for parents in that situation to be given a clear choice. Like, yes, I would have been in an insane amount of pain. I had just had surgery, but I think that the mental and emotional anguish would have drowned out anything. And like, I really wanted to be present in a different way than I was able to be for my baby. So it feels like I lost something else there.
mm.
So I just wanted to bring that up in the context of
Yeah.
getting kind of clinical support and how much that has traumatized me and how much I regret
Yeah. No, that's a
that.
really, I think that was something that needed to be said here because so many moms go through that, right? Having to experience like holding our babies for the first and the last time and just being robbed of that true experience. Yeah, I think that needed to be said. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Can I invite you to take a breath in with me? Tell me, what was the first year after loss like? Like,
Oh,
what changed?
this might be a horrible analogy because I know that a lot more children are lost to these kinds of situations, but like when you see war zones on the news and you see a picture of what that city used to look like, all
Mm.
beautiful on the skyline and the sunset, and then you see a picture of burning rubble and body parts everywhere, that literally feels like an accurate description of what it felt like after losing him.
Mm-hmm.
My I was just really in pure shock and didn't want to see anybody for about 3 months. It took a long time to I remember just getting up in the morning. I wore the same robe I had worn for my whole pregnancy, and just getting up in the morning, making Earl Grey tea with a shot of whiskey in it, like every day for months, because I just couldn't, you know, not getting drunk or anything, because I was healing from surgery, but just like I was like, there's no fucking point in anything. There's no point in taking
Right.
care of myself. Like,
Yeah.
I just need to not feel this bad for like a second.
Yeah, that's right.
I was not able to really work or do anything useful. I There was a part of me that started burning, like a fire that started burning inside of me as soon as I lost Wilder. And I think people describe it as being in a state of grace, where my heart was like shattered and it burst open. And I felt like it was just like leaking love and light and
Mm.
grace everywhere. And I felt very like in tune with the suffering of the world and understanding of like the true nature of the suffering of humanity. I felt like my blinders had been ripped off and I was fully awake for the first time and able to see and know what human suffering means.
Mm.
And so I was filled with this immense sense of like grace and empathy for the whole world and everyone who had ever wronged me,
Mm.
and
Wow.
this immense sense of like forgiveness of every little infraction that had ever been taken against me in my life, because everything just paled so greatly in comparison to the true nature of like, I was like, oh, now I know what it really
Yeah.
means
Oh,
to be hurt.
yeah.
um and so in that first year it took a long time to recover. um i I lost a few other close friendships,
Mm.
um because of their relational ability to be in grief, and not with anger towards them. But there was just some relationships that I had to release from my experience because I knew that they just were never going to be healthy on the level that I knew I was going to heal into.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it was like going to be important in my life. It was almost like I had no more time for bullshit.
Right, right.
Everything that wasn't important was stripped away to the barest
Yeah.
bones.
Yeah. And grief, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Like, grief is like a magnifier, right? Like,
Yes.
if
Oh,
it's good, it gets really good in friendships. And other times, if it's any kind of dysfunction, you just have no. I remember in my experience, I had no emotional bandwidth to deal with
no.
any kind of shit, like in anybody's,
Either. Like
whether it
no
was like,
bullshit allowed.
no, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I think, I took a pretty hard line with a few people at that time where there was friendships that had damaging components to them, where I just said, I'm not doing this anymore and I love you, but I'm just gonna let this go now with no animosity, just like this is not gonna serve me and I need to heal if I'm gonna move forward, because I knew with my age, that I wanted to have a kid. We decided in the hospital, and I feel like a monster saying that we decided before Wilder died that we would want to try again. And I asked his permission before he left.
Mm.
And I told him that was the best way I could think of to honor him, was to give all of that love to a
Mm.
sibling.
Mm.
And I promised him that I would, never stop mothering him, and that I would give all that love and put it all somewhere. And so, from the course that we were in, and my
Mhm.
focus now on raising awareness and supporting other people through pregnancy and infant loss, that it's become a real mission for me. And the way that I stay in connection with him, that's the way I mother him, is to try and support other people through this pain. And I also just want to say too that, like, in the initial stages when I started to think about doing that, I thought, I had this idea that we have to be healed before we can help other people heal. And, being almost 4 years out from like conceiving him, or, my loss now, I now know that you do not have to be healed to help other people heal. You just have to be willing to sit with them in their pain.
And
Um,
yeah, and you do that so beautifully. I mean, look at all the projects that you're working on. You're parenting Wilder, I would say, so fiercely and so beautifully. It's really inspiring, to see you how you mother him. It's really beautiful.
thank
And
you
I'm
so
so glad I get to share that space with you in a small, tiny way. And you
much.
know, so you were kind of leaning into my next question a little bit. You said after the first year, like it was becoming very clear, kind of like for you to know who's gonna stay in your life and who's not.
Yeah.
Going along those same terms, like I always say, bereaved, like they always say, moms need a village to raise kids, and I think bereaved moms also need a village, right? And so, speaking about that village, what kind of support from your village has helped you, and what has been kind of missing in your journey?
So the people who just consistently showed up, even when they didn't know what to say or have anything to say, have been so helpful, because I can tell you I've seen a lot of people turn around and walk the other way in the grocery store when they think I didn't see them. And I don't blame those people at all. I did that to a bereaved mother once who was a friend of mine and felt bad about it, but now I understand. And actually, I was at that point where I thought, I'd rather you walk away than have to have this shitty
Yeah,
interaction in the chip and salsa aisle, really. Like,
right.
so things like going out in public were just incredibly hard, because you'd run into people, and I was not expecting the amount of awkwardness. Like, I knew that there was going to be grief and pain and heartache and devastation, but I wasn't expecting just the sheer amount of awkwardness when you'd run into people and their faces just fall, and you're like, man, I am trying to get an errand done and you're crying in an aisle, and I'm not even crying, and now I'm comforting you. So people who really
Mhm.
say too much of like, I'm sorry, or they, people I didn't know that well, who really brought a lot of their past trauma to my situation by crying and carrying on, to the point where I felt that I had to comfort them or tell them it was okay when it's obviously not okay. That's really difficult, and it's understandable. I think it's common and understandable, but that is one of the areas in which I'd like to increase people's competency around being with grief,
Yeah,
is just to let it be about them, and not maybe be performing more of an emotional show than the person who's actually experienced the loss.
right. No.
Um, so I got my close friends were just immensely supportive, but there's a couple of big pieces I want to speak to here about my experience. Was that I lost Wilder in November of 2019, November 28th, 2019. And then COVID started in February.
Mm,
So we managed to get a little trip in to Costa Rica, and then we got home and the world shut down. And it was such a surreal, apocalyptic experience to feel like my whole world just
mm,
crumbled. And then I watched the actual rest of the world crumble and shut down. And then the whole world went into isolation along with us. And it was really surreal. And
mm,
in a way, I by no means do I think it's okay how many people died and got sick from COVID. But in a way, I loved it at the time. Not the people dying, but just the fact that everybody shut down. And because I felt that pressure to get better and come out and be social, and try to
yeah.
put on this show like, look, I'm going to be okay for other people's benefits, around that 3 month mark. And so around that 3 month mark, when the whole world shut down and nobody wanted to see us either because everyone was worried about COVID, I was like, this just feels so appropriate to where I'm at. And I
Mm,
could really use sure, give me another year of isolation, because that is what I wanted in that moment.
right.
So
Wow.
it was like trauma on trauma, right? Like, we were so
Oh,
scared of death, and then it was like this COVID thing came around, and you know, what I really noticed in my partner's manifestation of grief, he was definitely like a toilet paper grocery hoarder who was like, we gotta buy guns and get on our sailboat. Oh, like,
Yeah.
you know, the hordes of zombies are coming to steal our toilet paper. We're all gonna die. My mom's gonna die. It was like really scary, right? It
Yeah.
scared us a little bit more, but I
Yeah.
think it scared some people because we were like, we were not among those people who were like, what are the chances? We were like, oh, the chances are pretty fucking good. We're all gonna die.
Yeah. It's coming. Yeah.
It's coming. So that was a really intense layer on top of that experience.
Wow.
And then I got pregnant 8 months after losing Wilder.
Mm.
So within before a year was even up, I was in my first trimester of a pregnancy again.
Wow.
And I had also been working really hard. And then I was very sick again in the beginning of my pregnancy. For my living son, Huxley, who's now 2. So in and out of the hospital, and that was immensely difficult in my first year because the first time I went to get fluid replacement back at the hospital, they put me in the room that I had started to lose Wilder in, and I was in there by myself with no one, and a needle in my arm, just sobbing uncontrollably. And so that is an example of terrible support and medical management. I thought, like, are you fucking kidding me right now?
Yeah.
And then the nurse came in and saw me crying, and she rushed over and held my hand. And I said, I'm so sorry, I'm losing it. I lost my baby in this room not long ago. And she burst into tears. And she held me in her arms like a baby. And she said, I know, honey. I was here and I've cried for you every day since. And I just thought, like, what an angel, just the way she cried with me and the way she held me. And she was so human that she said that how profoundly affected she had been by his loss as well. And it really helped me feel less alone. And she said, we're never going to have you in here again. We're going to make sure that you're in ambulatory care from now on. You don't even have to come into that ward. And so she changed everything for me.
Wow, that's awesome.
So she was amazing.
Yeah.
But
thank you for sharing that, because like that is just that when you have to go to the same hospital, walking through those doors is just it's heartbreak all over again. Even it's like your body reacts in that way, but your mind is like, your mind knows it's a different baby, different circumstance, but it doesn't matter. Like that kind of care is crucial to all the moms, that, or birthing parents that get pregnant again, right?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
So that was an intense experience that had good sides and bad sides. And a couple things to say, one about like family support, and then just a little bit more about the medical management. So in my subsequent pregnancy with Huxley, they made a lot of mistakes with me, such as like there's a couple of drugs that I was allergic to, like ondansetron, which is another nausea management, or I think it's for nausea management. And then there was another one, anyways, that can cause, maybe it is the ondansetron, and it can cause congenital heart failure in babies if it's given to mothers in the first trimester. And so they just said ondansetron is good for nausea and gave it to me, and I had a horrible reaction to it. And it was marked as an allergy on my chart. And then for 7 subsequent visits to get fluid replacement, they tried to get me ondansetron again in my IV bag. And so I had to, the first time I caught it, I said, oh, what are you putting in there? And she said, oh, don't worry, it's just for your nausea. And I said, which nausea medication is it? I'm only to get Gravol. And she said, oh, it's ondansetron. And I said, I'm allergic to ondansetron. This cannot be on my chart. And then she goes, oh yeah, it says here you are allergic to it. Sorry, those reports don't go through to the pharmacy. So when you get here, a pharmacy just sends stuff up. So that happened 7 times in a row, to the point where I felt my trust in the medical system is basically nothing at this point. I feel that if I had not been hyper vigilant and aware of everything that was going into me, they would have hurt me or my child. And I don't feel like it should have been my job to be that vigilant. And it literally made me think, what about all your patients who are unconscious, who cannot advocate for themselves? And I wonder how many people you guys are killing. So I had so much fear and anger. And that immediately made me think, did they really do the best that they could do? It took away all of my trust that in the situation where I lost Wilder, they had performed properly, because I thought, okay, you've made all these mistakes. It's been an absolute shit show in my care ever since. You have repeatedly done things that would endanger me and my new baby. And now I'm supposed to just believe that everything everything went well and that it was just an accident. Like it made it really, and that may well be the case. It probably is, but it made it extremely hard for me to believe. My midwife actually even got so upset by because I kept calling her crying after leaving. They did it again. She got to the point where she called them, yelled at them, had to issue a formal apology to be able to continue working in the hospital. Like it was so bad.
Wow.
Really,
Wow.
really bad.
Yeah. I think you're raising really um, important points. Like medical negligence is a thing, right? And it needs to be taken seriously because it impacts people in real time. It impacts the baby, the
Yes.
fetus too, and yeah, the care I think should have been given. And in the interview that we did for your, I think the work that you're doing behind the scenes is just crucial to acknowledging, giving that knowledge. So I look forward to sharing the interview that we did or the course that you put together in the future. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for your work on that because it's needed. It's needed
Yeah.
for somebody to speak on it and say this is not right.
Yeah, there was a few other really scary things too that you can cut them out if it's too long, but 6 days after I thought that I might have a little swelling at my CC section incision. So I went back to the OB who had actually back on where I live, not at the children's hospital. And to see if there was an infection, and he said everything was looking fine. And I said, I just remember commenting like, I just wish I could soak in a hot bath. And he said, oh, it's fine, go home and have a hot bath, which I now know you can even Google, like you do not do that for at least 2 weeks. And I was 6 days in, went home, had a hot bath, and within an hour my C-section incision just erupted with pus.
Ooh.
So I was rushed back to the hospital where they said, what were you thinking having a bath? You absolutely do not have a bath with a fresh C-section scar. And I said, my OB literally told me it was okay to go home and do this. And they basically just told me they didn't believe me. They're like, he would never say that. And my husband's like, well, I was there, and he absolutely did say that. And they brought in a student doctor to deal with me 6 days after losing my baby. So I was talking to a student doctor. They outlined my infection, which was spreading from my C-section scar. Because it was spreading so fast, they had to outline it. Then she said, okay, well, I'll give you some antibiotics to take home. They'll probably take 48 to 72 hours to start working. At which point my husband said, if this infection is spreading that fast, wouldn't it make more sense to give her intravenous antibiotics right now?
Yeah.
The doctor literally looked at us both and said, oh, that's a really good idea.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So my trust was shaken, and it made it extremely scary in my subsequent pregnancy. So when I got pregnant with Huxley, I was like, I'm not even going to get a splinter removed here.
Yeah, no
I went
kidding.
into the city for every single scan, everything. I got one of the top OBs in Canada from Children's Hospital who normally does high risk pregnancies because just to manage my psychological state.
Yeah.
She was awesome.
Yeah.
And it was from her I learned that if I had had him in a big city hospital, he would not have died because they have better monitoring equipment. And she straight up said to me, we don't lose babies that way here. So I have a lot of medical management trust issues.
Yeah.
I don't want to blame individual care providers because I do think that they are part of a larger culture or system within every hospital. Every place has its own culture that goes on. And so, I don't want to blame anybody individually.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I
I
don't.
do, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, I think the intention, with sharing these experiences is not to blame, like you said, or shame, but I think it kind of is a place to constructively say, you know what, this would have been really helpful if this could be changed for the future mothers to not get them to have this additional trauma and additional grief in the system, like that could be helpful.
Totally. And the
Um,
nurses were amazing. There was angels in my experience of loss and subsequent pregnancy for sure. The nurses at Children's Hospital are just so trained well in what they do. They were
yeah,
so appropriate in every way. I don't know another word to use.
yeah,
They made the worst experience of my life as good as it could possibly be. So
right.
I did want to shout that out.
Yeah, of course, of course. What do you want? So this is to wrap up the interview, but what would you want uh, Wilder to know most? Now that it's been 4 years and you have Huxley, his brother, right, living with you and being raised, like, what do you want him to know most?
I mostly want Huxley, or I mostly want Wilder to know how much I love him and how much I miss him. And also, I want him to know how grateful I am that I got to spend the time I did with him and that I'm very aware of the gifts he brought into my life and I will not squander them.
That's beautiful. Oh, thank you, my darling.